I met Sam at a fishing lodge about 2 years ago, and from the moment I laid eyes on him, I was hooked. He looked like someone who had spent his whole life on the water, tanned, rugged, with broad shoulders and rough hands that felt like they belonged to someone who could pull in the biggest catch of the day. His laugh was infectious, and he had this way of telling fishing stories that made me feel like I was right there with him, reeling in the line, fighting the pull of a fish that might just break the rod. We hit it off that night, talking about our favorite fishing spots, comparing tips, and laughing at each other's stories. There was something magnetic about him. The way he talked, the easy confidence he carried, it was impossible not to be drawn in. Before I knew it, we were spending every weekend together on his boat, drifting along the water, casting our lines, and waiting for the next big bite. It felt perfect. It wasn't long before we decided to get married. I know what people were thinking, too fast, too soon, but I didn't care. It was like being caught in a current, swept along by the excitement and the thrill of it all. Friends warned me to slow down, told me I was jumping in too quickly, but what did they know? They didn't know Sam like I did. We had this bond, a connection that felt natural, like we were meant to fish side by side for the rest of our lives. A year into our marriage, life still felt like a dream. We had our routines, early mornings on the boat, late nights talking by the dock. Sam would always come home with a smile, stories about the one that got away or the fish he almost landed. There was something about him, something so real, so grounded, that I couldn't help but fall deeper in love with him every time we were together. But just like the water can hide sharp rocks beneath its surface, there were signs that something wasn't right. I didn't notice them at first. I was too wrapped up in the excitement, the romance, the idea that I had found my perfect fishing partner for life. But slowly, those little signs started to tug at my mind, like a fish nibbling at the bait, testing the line. I had no idea just how deep those waters would go. It was subtle at first, the changes in Sam's behavior. He'd come home later than usual, claiming he was checking out a new fishing spot or helping a friend with his boat. I didn't think much of it. After all, he was a fisherman at heart, and it wasn't unusual for him to spend a few extra hours out on the water. But then, there were the times when he came back smelling different. It wasn't the smell of salt water or the earthy scent of fish. It was something sweeter, more perfumed. He laughed it off when I asked him about it. "Oh, that's just some woman down at the marina," he said with a shrug. "She uses way too much perfume. You know how it is." I nodded, but something about his explanation didn't sit right with me. The smell lingered, and soon enough, other things started to pop up. He began making last-minute fishing trips, ones that I wasn't invited to. He'd tell me he was going out with one of his fishing buddies, but when I asked who, his answers got vague. "Oh, just a guy from the lodge," he'd say. Or, "Someone from the marina, no one you know." Then there was the phone. Sam had always been easygoing, never one to stress over work, but now his phone was ringing constantly. He'd answer it quickly, stepping outside or into another room to take the call. At first, he'd tell me it was a friend asking for advice on fishing gear or something about a tournament, but it didn't feel right. I could see the tension in his shoulders when the calls came in, the way his smile faltered just a little when he looked at the screen. Something was off, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I started to wonder if I was imagining things, if maybe I was overreacting. But deep down, that feeling of unease kept growing, like the calm before a storm. I wasn't sure what to think. Part of me wanted to confront him, but another part of me was afraid of what I might find out. What if I was wrong? What if Sam was just busy, caught up in his own world of fishing and friends? I wanted to believe that. But the signs were there, small but undeniable. And once they started to add up, I knew I couldn't ignore them forever. I had to find out the truth. One night, after Sam had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he wasn't telling me, something big. I thought about asking him directly, but I knew how that would go. He'd laugh it off, make up some story about fishing trips or friends, and I'd be left with more questions than answers. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. I contacted a private investigator, someone who could follow Sam, find out what he was really up to. I felt a little guilty, like I was crossing a line I shouldn't be crossing, but at this point, I had no choice. I needed proof. I needed to know if my gut was right, or if I was just being paranoid. A week later, the investigator called me with the results. My stomach churned as I listened to him talk, confirming what I had feared all along. Sam wasn't just going on fishing trips. He was seeing other women. Multiple women. At least 5, maybe more. My head spun as the investigator described what he had seen, Sam meeting up with different women at the marina, taking them out on his boat, laughing and smiling like he didn't have a care in the world. I couldn't believe it. The man I had married, the man I thought I knew so well, was living a double life. He had cast his line out to more than just me, and the worst part was that I hadn't seen it coming. The investigators sent me pictures. Proof. There was Sam, standing by his boat, arm around a young blonde woman, smiling like nothing was wrong. There he was again, sitting at a dockside restaurant with another woman, her hand resting on his knee as they shared a plate of oysters. Each photo felt like a punch to the gut, and yet I couldn't stop looking at them. That night, Sam came home late again, reeking of lies. He mumbled something about a fishing buddy needing help with some gear, then crawled into bed next to me, falling asleep almost immediately. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Part of me was furious, but another part of me, dark and cold, wanted to see how far he'd take this. How many more lies he'd tell. How many more women he'd try to reel in before the line snapped. The days after I found out about Sam's affairs felt like living in someone else's life. I watched him carefully, every little thing he did now loaded with suspicion. What used to be endearing quirks, the way he laughed, the charm in his smile, now felt like weapons he used to deceive me. But I still didn't confront him. Instead, I waited. I wanted to see how deep his lies would go. Sam's behavior started to shift, subtly at first. His fishing trips became more frequent, and he was often late coming home. Caught a late bite, he'd say, or the guys wanted to grab a few beers after we docked. Every time he came back, I'd look at him, wondering which one of his lady friends he had been with this time. His excuses became more and more ridiculous as the days went by, but he told them with such confidence, such ease, that you'd think he actually believed them himself. Once, he came home with fresh scratches across his arms and shoulders. The sight of them made my stomach churn. When I asked him what happened, he didn't even blink. I slipped on the deck, he said, pulling his shirt off to show me the marks. Landed right against the rod holder. Took a chunk out of me, but I'm fine. He flashed that same charming smile, as if that was supposed to make me forget what I knew. Another time, he came back smelling like perfume again, but this time it was strong, like he had been swimming in it. I asked him about it, and he shrugged, completely unfazed. One of the women at the bait shop, he said, shaking his head. She's always all over me, trying to sell me more gear. Can't take a hint, I guess. He laughed like it was a joke, like he expected me to laugh along with him. But I didn't laugh. I just nodded and let him keep going. After all, the more he lied, the more he revealed. It was strange, watching him unravel like that. He didn't seem to realize that I knew. Or maybe he thought he was too clever, too good at covering his tracks. But with every lie, every poorly crafted excuse, I saw the cracks forming. His stories didn't line up, his excuses grew more convoluted, and the tension in him was becoming obvious. And then there was his phone. It rang constantly. At dinner, in the middle of the night, even when we were sitting on the boat together, pretending everything was normal. He'd glance at the screen, curse under his breath, and silence the call. Just work stuff, he'd say, or I'll deal with it later. But the calls kept coming, and I could tell by the way he tensed up when the phone rang that something was wrong. One night, I heard him talking on the phone in a low, angry whisper. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but I caught enough to know who was on the other end. "It's over, Marla," he hissed. "Stop calling me. Marla." She was the young one. Probably in her 20s, if I had to guess. From what the investigator had told me, she was the most smitten of all Sam's women. I'd seen pictures of her, petite, blonde, with wide, adoring eyes that looked at Sam like he was the only man on earth. She wasn't just one of his casual flings, she was obsessed with him. And now, she was becoming a problem. After hearing that phone conversation, I started to piece together what was happening. Sam wasn't just juggling a few flings, he was dealing with a full-blown obsession. Marla, it seemed, had latched onto him in a way that went beyond the casual affairs he was used to. I could see it in the way he reacted to her calls, the tension in his voice when he mentioned her name. She was the one who wasn't letting go. I decided to do a little investigating of my own. The private investigator had already dug up enough dirt on Sam, but I needed to know more about Marla. Who was she, really? And why was she so desperate to hold on to him, even after he'd clearly moved on to the next catch? I followed her schedule for a few days, learning her routine. She was easy to find, same bait shop, same cafe, same gym, almost like clockwork. It wasn't hard to figure out where she'd be, and one afternoon, I decided to run into her. She was browsing through the fishing lures, looking completely at ease, not knowing her world was about to shatter. I walked up to her casually, like we were old friends. "Hey," I said, smiling as I picked up a lure from the shelf next to her. She glanced at me, then froze when she realized who I was. I didn't wait for her to say anything. "I'm Sam's wife," I said simply, letting the words hang in the air like a bomb. Her face went pale, and for a moment, she just stared at me, like she couldn't process what I'd just said. What?" she finally stammered. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction as I watched her crumble. "Yeah," I said, still smiling. "I'm Sam's wife. You know, the guy you've been seeing for the past few months? The guy who told you he was single?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the pictures, the ones the investigator had taken of Sam with the other women, the proof that he wasn't just cheating on me, but on her too. Marla's eyes went wide as she looked at the photos, her hands trembling. She was speechless. "I know how you feel," I continued. "I was charmed by him too. But you deserve better. We both do." Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving Marla standing there, stunned and broken. I didn't need to say anything else. The truth was enough. After that encounter with Marla, I felt a strange sense of control. I had been the one wronged, the one betrayed, but I wasn't just sitting back and taking it. No, I was unraveling Sam's world bit by bit, and watching it crumble around him. Marla had been his little secret, and now she knew everything. She knew she wasn't the only one he'd been stringing along, and I could see in her face that she wasn't going to take it lightly. But what now? What was Sam going to do? What was Marla going to do? In the days that followed, Sam's behavior became even more erratic. His lies, once so smooth and effortless, began to crack under pressure. He was quieter around the house, more anxious, and his constant excuses for being out late became less believable with every passing day. He started checking his phone obsessively, as if waiting for something. I could tell he was afraid that his perfect little system was falling apart. And it was. The phone calls from Marla didn't stop. They came more frequently, often at odd hours of the night, interrupting our dinner or our quiet evenings by the water. Each time, Sam would tense up, shoot me a quick glance, and then either ignore the call or step out of the room to answer it. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I knew what was going on, and so did he. One night, I decided to press him just a little. We were sitting in the living room, watching TV, when his phone rang again. It was late, past midnight, and the call lit up his screen like a warning flare. He glanced at it, then at me, and I could see the frustration in his eyes. "Aren't you going to get that?" I asked, keeping my voice light, almost playful. Sam forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's just work stuff," he said, silencing the phone and setting it face down on the table. "Nothing important." I nodded, pretending to believe him. But the tension in the air was palpable, and I knew he could feel it too. We sat in silence for a few minutes before he finally got up, muttering something about being tired and heading to bed. I stayed on the couch, listening as his footsteps retreated down the hallway, my mind racing. This couldn't go on much longer. Something was about to snap. A few days later, Sam didn't come home. It wasn't like him to stay out all night, even with his growing list of excuses, so when the hours stretched on and he still hadn't returned, I knew something was wrong. I called his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried his friends, but none of them had heard from him. I even called the marina, thinking maybe he'd gone out for a late-night fishing trip, but no one had seen him there either. By morning, I was worried. I started calling around, his office, his fishing buddies, his parents, but no one had any idea where he was. It wasn't until later that afternoon that I got the call. A police officer told me I needed to come down to the station immediately. My heart pounded in my chest as I drove there, my mind spinning with possibilities. Had there been an accident? Was Sam okay? As much as I was furious with him, the idea that something terrible had happened still sent a wave of fears through me. When I arrived, the officer didn't waste any time. He told me that Sam had been found dead. I felt my stomach drop. He and his secretary, Marla, had been found at her cabin by the lake, both of them brutally murdered. The officer's voice sounded distant, like I was hearing it through water, as he explained that their skulls had been crushed, likely with a blunt object. There were no signs of forced entry, and they didn't have a suspect yet. I broke down right there in the station. I screamed, I cried, letting out all the anger and betrayal I had bottled up inside. But I wasn't mourning Sam. No, my tears were for the life I had thought I had, the life he had ripped away from me with his lies. The police thought I was devastated, and in a way, I was. But not in the way they imagined. As the investigation dragged on, Sam's secrets spilled out into the open like bait thrown into the water for all to see. His affairs, once hidden behind layers of lies, now became a central part of the police inquiry. I sat in the station, my mind numb as they asked question after question, their voices distant, as though I was floating outside of myself. "Did you know about his affairs?" one of the officers asked, his tone careful, as if afraid I might break down again. I nodded, wiping at my eyes, though no fresh tears came. I had spent them all earlier when they told me Sam was dead. Yes, I admitted, my voice shaky but controlled. I knew. It was difficult. But he was my husband. I loved him. The words felt strange in my mouth, like they belonged to someone else. The officer exchanged a look with his partner, then leaned forward, his notebook poised. "How long had you known?" I took a deep breath, trying to play the part of the heartbroken widow. "About 6 months. I hired a private investigator when I started noticing the changes in him, coming home late, the phone calls, the perfume on his clothes." I let my voice waver, just enough to sell the role. I didn't want to believe it at first. I thought he was just stressed or going through a rough patch. But when the investigator showed me the photos, I trailed off, shaking my head as if I still couldn't quite believe it. In truth, I had accepted Sam's betrayal long before that. The moment I saw those pictures, I had felt something shift inside me, something cold and calculating. But the police didn't need to know that. "He was seeing multiple women?" the officer asked, scribbling in his notebook. I nodded again. "At least 5 that I knew of, maybe more. He told me he was a sex addict, that he didn't love them, that they didn't mean anything to him." I swallowed hard, letting the bitterness creep into my voice. "He said we were going to get counseling, that he wanted to work on our marriage." The officer jotted something down, then flipped to a new page in his notebook. "And Marla? The secretary?" "Ah, Marla. The one who had finally broken the surface of Sam's lies." "Yes," I said softly. "I knew about her too. She was one of the women he was seeing. She was younger, I think, and very attached to him. I overheard him telling her on the phone that it was over, but she didn't seem to take it well." The officers exchanged another look. They were piecing it together, forming their own narrative of what had happened. To them, it must have seemed like a simple case of jealousy, a scorned lover who couldn't bear to let go. "Did you ever speak to her?" one of them asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. I paused, just long enough to make it seem like I was trying to remember. "We ran into each other once," I said carefully. "I told her I knew about the affair, and that I thought she deserved better. I wasn't angry with her. I knew it was Sam who had done this, who had betrayed both of us. It wasn't technically a lie, but I left out the part where I had shown her the pictures, revealed all of Sam's other women, and watched the devastation unfold across her face. I didn't need to tell them that. Let them think Marla had simply been a woman scorned, desperate for Sam's love and driven to madness by his rejection." "Marla's gone missing," the officer said, watching my reaction closely. I nodded, feigning surprise. "I heard," I whispered. "Do you think she—" I didn't finish the sentence, letting the question hang in the air like a half-cast fishing line. "We don't know yet," the officer said, closing his notebook. "But it's possible. We're looking into it." I nodded again, wrapping my arms around myself as if I were cold. Inside, my mind was racing. Marla had vanished the day before Sam's murder, leaving her apartment and quitting her job without a trace. The police were obviously suspicious, but they didn't have enough to go on. Not yet, anyway. As I left the station that day, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. Sam's lies had finally caught up to him, and now the police were circling around Marla, the perfect suspect. She had vanished just in time, and no one seemed to be looking my way. It was almost too perfect. The story the police were building was one of jealousy, betrayal, and revenge, and I had carefully played my part in shaping it. But there was still a nagging thought at the back of my mind, one that I couldn't shake no matter how hard I tried. Marla was gone, yes, but where had she gone? Was she running from the police? From the guilt? Or was she planning something else? Something that involved me? I didn't have the answer yet, but I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going to let my guard down. Sam had played his game, and now it was over. But Marla? She was still out there, somewhere. And I wasn't sure if this story was truly finished. As I left the police station that day, the weight of it all pressed down on me. Sam's secrets were out, the affairs laid bare for everyone to see, and now the police were circling around Marla. She had vanished just before Sam's death, making her the prime suspect in their eyes. But something about it all felt too easy. Too simple. My mind raced as I drove home, replaying everything I had told the police, everything I had learned. Marla had been obsessed with Sam, that much was clear. But was she capable of murder? Could she really have snapped and taken his life in a jealous rage? The police seemed to think so, but I wasn't entirely convinced. There was something unsettling about the way she had disappeared, like she had slipped away just in time, leaving everyone else to deal with the wreckage. Back home, I tried to settle into a normal routine. But the house felt different now, empty, hollow, as though the walls themselves were holding on to the echoes of Sam's betrayal. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the cup of coffee I had made but had no intention of drinking. My thoughts kept drifting back to Marla, wondering where she had gone. And more than that, what she was thinking. The police hadn't been able to find a trace of her. She had quit her job, cleared out her apartment, and vanished without a word. It was almost as if she had planned it all along, as though she knew the storm was coming and had slipped away before it hit. I tried to imagine where she might be, hiding out at some remote fishing lodge, waiting for everything to blow over, or maybe plotting her next move. And then, of course, there was the question that nagged at me most: was I next? Had I become a part of her obsession, just by virtue of being married to Sam? I had seen the way she looked at him in the photos, the desperation in her eyes, the possessiveness. She had clung to him as if he were the only thing tethering her to reality. And when I had told her the truth, about Sam's other women, about the lies he had spun, something inside her had broken. I had seen it happen. Had I gone too far? Had I pushed her over the edge? The thought made my skin crawl, but I couldn't shake it. Every time I looked out the window, every time I walked outside, I found myself scanning the area, half expecting to see Marla lurking in the shadows, waiting for her chance to strike. It was a ridiculous thought, I knew that, but it didn't stop the chill from creeping down my spine whenever I heard a noise outside. I wasn't paranoid, not yet. But I was cautious. I kept replaying my conversation with the police, wondering if I had said too much. I had kept most of the details to myself, of course, especially the part where I had confronted Marla at the bait shop, where I had planted the seeds of doubt in her mind, showing her the evidence of Sam's other affairs. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had underestimated her. Marla wasn't some innocent, love-struck girl. She had depth. She had obsession. And that made her dangerous. The news of Sam's murder spread through the small town like wildfire. Everyone had heard about it within a day, and whispers of his affairs floated around in the air like a bad smell. The marina, the bait shops, the local pubs, everywhere I went, I could feel the stares, hear the hushed voices. Sam had been well liked in the fishing community, admired for his skill on the water, and his death, under such violent circumstances, had shocked everyone. But it wasn't just his death that had them talking. It was the way he had lived his life, the secret affairs, the tangled web of lies he had spun. People were starting to realize that the man they thought they knew was not the man he truly was. And as much as it stung, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. Sam's charm, his smooth-talking ways, they had fooled everyone. But in the end, the truth had come to the surface, like a fish caught on a line. I wasn't grieving, not the way people expected me to. I had shed my tears, but they weren't for Sam, they were for the life I had thought I had. The life I had lost the moment I realized the extent of his betrayal. And now, with Marla still out there somewhere, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As the days passed, I became more and more convinced that Marla was watching me. I hadn't seen her, hadn't heard from her, but the feeling lingered, gnawing at me like a fish nibbling on bait. I started double-checking the locks on the doors, looking over my shoulder when I was out on the dock, my senses heightened in a way they had never been before. It was strange, feeling like the prey instead of the predator. I had always been in control, always one step ahead. But now, with Marla out there, I wasn't so sure. She had slipped away so easily, vanished without a trace, leaving everyone else to clean up the mess she had made. And I couldn't shake the feeling that she was waiting for her next move. The calm before the storm, they call it. And I knew that the storm was coming. It's been a few weeks since Sam's death, but the chill in the air hasn't lifted. If anything, it's settled deeper into my bones, like the calm before a storm that never comes. Sam's secrets unraveled, his affairs laid bare for the world to see, but the one person who seemed to matter most, Marla, remains missing. The police are still looking for her, but I know deep down that they won't find her unless she wants to be found. I've tried to move on, to pretend that life could somehow go back to normal, but that's impossible. Not with Marla still out there. Not with the gnawing feeling that she's watching, waiting. The house feels emptier without Sam, but it's not his absence that haunts me. It's hers. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside my window makes my heart race. My gut tells me she hasn't gone far, and each day that passes makes me feel like the noose is tightening. I don't know what she wants. Revenge, maybe? Or closure. Perhaps she thinks that, as Sam's wife, I'm somehow to blame for his betrayal, that I was part of the lies he spun to keep her at bay. But whatever she's thinking, one thing is certain, this isn't over. Not for her. Not for me. I don't leave the house much anymore, and when I do, I make sure to stay in crowded places. Fishing, once my solace, has lost its appeal. The thought of being out on the water, alone and exposed, with only the sound of the wind and the lapping of the waves around me, is too unsettling. I used to love the quiet of the lake, but now it feels like a trap. A place where someone could be watching from the shore, waiting for the right moment to make their move. The marina has become a place of whispers. Everyone still talks about Sam, about his affairs, about how no one really knew the man behind the charming smile. They talk about Marla too, but there's a hesitation in their voices when they mention her name. People like to gossip, but even they can feel the danger lingering in the air. Everyone knows she's still out there. They just don't know where, or what she might do next. Sometimes, I wonder if I'm overreacting. Maybe Marla has disappeared for good. Maybe she's run off to another town, started a new life where no one knows her story. But then, I remember the look in her eyes when I showed her those pictures, the way her face crumbled when she realized she wasn't the only one. That kind of hurt doesn't just go away. It festers. It grows. One afternoon, I went down to the lake, against my better judgment. I thought maybe I could reclaim some of the peace I had once found there, but as I stood by the water's edge, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The wind was gentle, the water calm, but something felt off. I scanned the tree line, searching for movement, for a figure lurking in the shadows, but saw nothing. Still, the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave me. It followed me all the way back to the house, where I locked the door behind me and stood in the quiet, listening for something, anything. The police still check in from time to time. They're convinced Marla's disappearance is connected to Sam's murder, and they're not wrong. But they haven't asked me the one question that lingers in my mind: what if Marla isn't hiding from the police? What if she's waiting? I keep the doors locked now. I check the windows every night before I go to bed. There's a kitchen knife tucked away under my pillow, not that it'll help much if Marla decides to come after me. I'm not paranoid, at least, I don't think I am. I'm just prepared. After all, she's the one who's out there, hiding in plain sight, while I sit here, waiting for something I can't predict. I sometimes wonder if I should leave town, start fresh somewhere far away. But what good would that do? Marla would find me if she wanted to. I've come to realize that she's the type who doesn't let go of her obsessions easily. The same way she clung to Sam, she might cling to me, seeing me as the last piece of the puzzle she needs to complete. But here's the thing, I'm not afraid of Marla. Not really. I've played this game longer than she has, and I've learned a thing or two about survival. If she thinks she can just come for me, then she's underestimating the wrong person. Because, as obsessed as she is, I know something she doesn't. I'm crazier.